This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast. Each week, we look at how high net worth families can improve their lives, decisions, and investments in a deeply uncertain world. We always aim to provide practical information, even if we can't offer specific investment advice. Welcome, everyone, to the Definitely Uncertain podcast. My name is Darren Rockman, and with me today is Mireet Wolf, General Counsel here at Goldrock Capital. Hi, Mireet.
Hi, Darren. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking a lot recently about uncertainty in financial markets, and particularly as it relates to the corona crisis through which we are all currently living. But you've been dealing with a different aspect of this, really around what goes on within the dynamic of high net worth families and how they need to respond to the current uncertainty. And perhaps tell us a little bit about what you've been doing of late.
Yes, sure. Families, like nations and institutions, are living, breathing organisms that have a life of their own. And a pandemic like the coronavirus has highlighted the fault lines, the situations where you're not prepared for certain things. It shows the flaws in how the organism functions. At the same time, I see this as an opportunity because it gives the family an opportunity and a chance to figure out those fault lines and to address them and approach them and handle them. And those fault lines can be practical, how the family functions on a practical level. And of course, they also, because it's a family, involve emotional and personal issues as well that creep up during times like this.
Perhaps give us some examples of some of those fault lines and how a high net worth family can deal with them.
Sure. So on the practical side, the fault lines that we see are just how things happen on a day-to-day basis with the family. So we had certain situations where family members were just not online. So it became very difficult to do any sort of business during a time like this. And they didn't have access to bank accounts. They didn't have access to money. They didn't have access to be able to transfer things between bank accounts. And you'd be surprised because it's 2020, but we did see that. And of course, often it is with the older generation, but that does exist. At the same time, we saw practical situations. People might not have their documents in order, and they realize that when they need them during a time like this. For example, we had one client who had his passport in his office safe, which was a great idea when he was going to the office every day, not such a great idea when he was stuck at home and needed some identification or needed his passport for whatever reason. So these are the scenarios that we were dealing with. And of course, it's a good opportunity, whether or not you have a situation creep up that shows you don't have something on hand. It's also a good opportunity to make sure your estate planning documents are in order, to make sure you have a power of attorney for everyone in the family, to make sure everyone in the family is aware of passwords, accounts, where they are, how to get into them. We have often in spousal situations that one spouse handles all the finances and handles all of the investments, and the other spouse has no clue. This is a good time to realize that should not be, that is not a way to run a family. Right. Yes, it's okay for one family member to handle the finances, but the other family member should be educated.
Right. Sounds like really simple stuff, but actually at a time like the one we've just been going through, it becomes quite critical.
It becomes quite critical, and it's things you don't necessarily think of. So we had another family where one of the members, and it was actually a young family member, was doing his banking at a local banking institution. And it works very well when he can go into the local branch and see the teller he sees every day and give him checks and pick up deposits. It did not work as well during a crisis like this. I don't want to push for any particular financial institution, but the larger financial institutions, their online access, their ability to respond to a crisis like this is really unparalleled. And this client, he was in a jam for a little bit of time, and we will move him once the crisis is over to a larger financial institution, but we are working with him now, and it's making things that much more difficult.
Right. And of course, this always comes on top of, during a crisis, there are financial things that you absolutely have to do. There are capital calls that you have to pay. There are
That's
maybe
right.
trades that you want to be doing. You need to move capital from one part of your holdings to another so that you can appropriately respond to the moves in markets.
I mean, even on a personal level, he had a situation where he had to have other family members pay his bills.
Hmm.
And we're keeping a tally, but that's not very pleasant, and there's no reason for that. But again, because they are in different locations and distance, and the bank itself is closed, it made it very difficult for things to practically happen.
So if we move away from the practical stuff and let's talk a little bit more, you touched before on family dynamics. So let's talk a little bit about that.
We also have to be very sensitive, and we're dealing with this in our office, about the emotions between family members. So, for example, let's start with parents and children. Children are helping out their parents potentially, and you have several children, and they're located all across the world. It's very important, first of all, that everyone is aware of what everyone else is doing. The dialogue needs to be open, and it will fall on one child over another for two reasons. One is geography, right? The child that lives closest to the parent is going to do the shopping, is going to pick up whatever needs to be picked up, the medicine and that sort of thing. The child who's far away can't do that. But there's also strengths and weaknesses in a family. So one child may be better at handling the finances, and that will fall on him or her. It's very important that everyone be kept updated about what is going on. No one be kept in the dark. That can only lead to resentment and ill will and confusion. And it's also important that we validate the children. If one child is actually taking on a lot of responsibility, I think it's important for him to voice that and other people in the family to acknowledge that. So I think what we've learned in this crisis is that dialogue, honest communication, transparency is so critical between family members. And a once a week telephone meeting probably should be in place when there's not a crisis, but a crisis is a great opportunity to get that into place, to, even if it's going to be a 5-minute call once a week on Sunday morning and everyone's just going to touch base, that's very important. It lowers any resentment, it lowers confusion, it makes the family run efficiently as a organism.
Right. And I think you touched on an important point, which is it's all fine and well to do this during a crisis, but it's much, much better to do this during a calm period where you can do the transition, you can build the lines of communication, you can allocate responsibilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. But unfortunately, the human nature is such that people tend to delay and avoid unpleasant situations. So that's what I said in the beginning, and when we started, which is it's not a bad time to have those honest discussions. It's not a bad time to do the estate planning. You have time. Most of us are at home or have long hours, when we're alone, and we can think what we want to do. But also, it's a time to put into place and to force, not to force, but in a sensitive kind of way to address the issues in the family. And that's another point I want to bring up, that a lot of it is sensitivity. So, for example, if you need to get older family members online, perhaps the way to phrase it is, let's put this into place so that it's there when we need it. And I have a family where the parents are very reluctant to give up control. So the compromise was they still do their bills. They still are writing checks in 2020, but the daughter has access to everything online now. So everyone knows that someone's watching. If emails have to go to financial institutions, those are happening. So again, it does not lead the parents to feel that they've been stripped of their independence, but at the same time, a system has been put into place, which allows everyone to sleep better at night.
It's sort of akin to a corporate disaster recovery plan where you've got your sort of plan A, which is your regular running. And then if something really bad happens, things switch over to plan B. And that's, children or one of the children actually being able to do things in a way which is different to the way that they're usually done, but then works. And to make sure that plan B is in place.
That's right. It's exactly, as we said, families are like corporations, and that's exactly what this is. And of course, it's nice to do it when you're all sitting in the same office and can rationally have discussions. Unfortunately, as I said, sometimes situations like this, accelerate the need for it and get results. And again, it's to put that into place so that when the time comes, and the nice thing about putting it into place now is that hopefully these parents can continue handling their affairs for a long time. But now it's in place, and no one has to worry that in 2 years or 3 years, they're going to be scrambling. And I think that's important to remember.
So I think we've addressed one area of uncertainty that's come up during this corona crisis. If you want to give us your one top tip as what a family should do tomorrow to be better prepared, what would you say that was?
I think the number one most important thing is to actually make sure that, and this is not, it's actually more emotional and practical, that dialogue and communication is open, and that you have, I think the best strategy I would say to a family at this point is make sure you have once a week meetings on Zoom, on the phone, in person, and that will lead to you taking care of issues as they come up, and rather than being in crisis mode and having to deal with them all at once.
Okay. Well, Mireet, thank you very, very much for joining the Definitely Uncertain podcast.
Thanks.
We have more podcasts coming your way soon from Goldrock Capital. Thanks, everyone.